an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Young Wizards, Book 6, A Wizard Alone, the remainder of the chapter titled Quandaries, and the entirety of the chapter titled Elucidations. In these chapters, it turns out that the person Nita keeps running into in her dreams seems to be Darryl, and he seems to be very significant. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Tristen for commissioning this episode. Hey, Tristen, if you're out there, what's up? So, there is a lot to go over here, especially once we get to the part, well, I'm getting ahead of myself just talking about it, but I am going to try my best to keep this moving because I go over time a lot. So I had to end mid-chapter last time, as some of you may remember, and I decided to pick up from Kit, querido, Kit's mama said, if you feed that dog so many dog biscuits, you'll spoil his appetite for dinner. So that's the sentence for those of you who are reading along. And Kit, in this scene, he is feeding Punch, and he's also trying to read this book on autism. And I'm going to read what he is reading to you guys. I have to mention, I don't know if I've said this in other episodes, but the edition that I have the Kindle edition. There are a lot of typos, like one per page. And I'm not entirely sure what's going on. It's kind of weird to me that evidently I'm reading like a revised edition of the book where they updated language to make it less ableist and, you know, to just sort of modernize it for our understanding of autism today versus when it was written. And I find it really strange that those, like, you know, that the viewpoints on autism, those have been updated, but they apparently didn't try to correct any of the typos. I wonder what that is about. Let's see. Okay. The analysis of autism in this book was making some sense to him in terms of what he'd been getting from Darryl. There were apparently autistic people who found the complications of life and emotion so threatening that when they did artwork, it often featured landscapes that looked sterile and empty to a casual viewer. But the artist's intent was to express a desire for a little peace, for relief from the assault on their senses that caused them such pain. Since coming across this idea in the book, Kit had been doing his best to get the whole thing read, mining it for ways to make sure that he actually got some good out of his conversation with Darryl when it finally happened. Unfortunately, the reading was being made difficult, if not impossible, by the large black muzzle that kept insinuating itself between Kit and the open pages. So, yeah, I found that really interesting, the idea of, like, art as a means of giving yourself the peace that you can't seem to get in life. And that is so devastating to me in a way. The idea of like living in a world that is simply not built for somebody of your sensitivity. And so the only way to escape that is into something that you've created for yourself, because it's just, that's not how the world tends to be. And just how tiring and overwhelming that would be. At one point, Ponch is asking Kit for more treats, and Kit's mom laughs. Kit glanced up at her. He's loud sometimes, honey. I don't know why you can't hear it. She says that to Kit's dad. From what Kit says, I don't know why you can hear it at all. None of us should be able to. Maybe it's because I usually feed him in the mornings, Kit's mama said. I'm used to hearing him complain he's not getting enough. She made a kind of noise that went up into a whine at the end, a fair imitation of Ponch's reaction to an empty dish when there was someone around who could give him the rest of the can of dog food. Ponch's eyes moved at that, a sideways glance. Her accent's not bad. I could teach her Sain. I really want to know if this is anything. Maybe this is sort of a little throwaway thing, but I would kind of love it if it turned out that, like, Kit's connection to wizardry was from some, like, latent talent that his mother has that she either didn't realize she had or that she didn't tap into. You know, we know that there's a whole thing with, like, if you don't use your power correctly, you will lose it. And I don't think that's the case, or else they wouldn't have had the, like, intense reaction of anxiety that they did when Kit finally told them that he was a wizard. But it would be kind of interesting, actually, in this series to meet a wizard who had lost their abilities, who tried to do something for the wrong reasons, and see how things wound up for them and the way they feel about it now. So let's see. His father is making minestrone soup, which they all deeply enjoy. It is getting really cold, and it's supposed to snow that night. And Kit asks how much they're going to get, and they're going to get 6 to 8 inches. It wouldn't be anything like enough to make them keep school closed on Monday. That would take at least a few feet. Not for the first time. He wished that it wasn't unethical to talk a snowstorm into dumping 3 feet of snow onto his immediate neighborhood. It was fun to think about, but the trouble he would have gotten into with Tom and Carl, not to mention the powers that be, would have made the pleasure short-lived. This is, first of all, I love the fact that, you know, as a Northeastern American myself, yeah, you need a lot more snow than that, or you need a lot of ice. Like, you know, one or the other in order to get school closed. Meanwhile, I'm down here in Texas, and, like, they just say that it might be icy, and they will cancel stuff ahead of time. And often it doesn't wind up being icy because it's so much warmer here than we often expect it to be. Even in the winter. That said, we did have, like, one of the worst disasters in our state over this past winter. But it's just funny to read about, like, you know, 6 to 8 inches here. That's a big deal. And up there, it's just like, oh yeah, we'll definitely still have to go to school. And Owen has talked about wanting to live somewhere where we get snow. And I think part of that is because he's used to living places where once you get snow, everything sort of shuts down. But it's very different where you live somewhere that's used to the snow, because nobody is expected to give up anything because it has snowed. Everyone's still expected to go to work. Everybody is still going out to dinner and grocery shopping and everything. It's just, it's not seen as the interruption that it is here. So I kind of wonder if after a year of having to clean his car off and go to work in a foot of snow, he might feel a little bit differently about it. So he asks his dad if the TV is still okay. And this thing with the TV keeps coming up. It hasn't actually crystallized into anything yet. But he says, every now and then it shows me a news advertisement for some other planet. But as long as nothing happens to interfere with the basketball games, I don't mind seeing who's grown a new head or whatever. What in the hell is up with this television situation? I can't tell if it was just played for a joke or if this is really going to be something. So Kit goes outside to see Ponch, and Ponch is sitting at the end of the driveway looking at the sky, sort of feels a little bit more introspective than he normally does, and Kit goes up to him and is like, hey buddy, what's going on? Are you all right? Pretty much. Kit wondered about that. I mean, about what happened the other day. He reached down to scratch the dog's head. I think so. What did happen? I saw something. Yeah? What was it? Not that way, Ponch said. I mean, I noticed something. I never really noticed it before. You get hurt sometimes. That makes me sad. Yeah, well, I get sad when you're hurt too. That's right. And your dam and your sire and your litter mates, they hurt sometimes too. So does Nita. I noticed that. But it didn't seem to matter as much as you hurting. But then I saw him, Darryl, and what that one was doing to him, and how it hurt him. And he didn't do anything to deserve that. It was awful the way he was hurting, and that started to hurt me. And then I thought, why doesn't the others hurt make me feel like this? And then I felt bad about myself. And the others didn't deserve to be hurt either. Nita didn't do anything bad for her mother to die. Why should she be hurt like that? Why should Darreen or your sire or dam? They're good. Why do they have to suffer when they haven't been bad? It's not fair. I don't know, Kit said. I really don't know. I felt sad for them all, Ponch said. Sad for everything, because it shouldn't have to be that way. All of a sudden I had to howl, that's all. This is a question, man. That's the question. Why do bad things happen to good people? After dinner, we're going looking for Darryl again. We'll see if we can't get a word with him, find out what's going on. Then he can get himself out of there, and we can go back to doing what we usually do. Oh, sweetie, he makes it sound like it's going to be so simple. So he goes back inside, eats dinner with his parents. They make sure to tell him that first, he needs to be back at a decent hour, and second of all, he really does need to rest because he's looking a little haggard. As it turns out, time passes very differently where they go than what he expected. So by the time he comes back, it's like 2:30 in the morning, something like that. And it's just really like unpredictable going into this kid's mind, which is not surprising. So they get ready, step into the darkness together. They did indeed have to walk for some time. Kit kept a careful eye on the line of wizardry stretching between him and Ponch, watching to make sure that it was drawing power correctly and that the faint diagnostic glow of light running up and down was doing so regularly. Beyond that, there wasn't much for Kit to do for a long while except keep walking through the dark, watching the ever so faintly illuminated shape of his dog as Ponch led the way. A whispering sound, very faint, seemingly very far away, was the first thing that Kit started to notice as differing from the darkness and silence surrounding them. It was incessant, a soft white noise hiss at a high frequency, but every now and then Kit thought he heard words in it. Am I just imagining that? He thought as the hiss got louder. You hear that? He said to Ponch. The wind? Ponch said. Yeah, it's up ahead where Darryl is. We'll be there soon. I mean, do you hear something beside the wind? The voices? Ponch paused a moment, cocked his head to one side. No, he said. Not right now, anyway. Let's get there and see if I hear it then. They started walking again. Quite suddenly, as if they walked through a curtain, Kit and Ponch were surrounded by blue-white light. Kit stopped looking around him, blinking. After the darkness, this brilliance was dazzling. So this is really weird, and I'm not entirely sure what's going on with it here. It's like the voices that they hear, I think, the way I'm interpreting this is they are approaching his consciousness, and so they're hearing the faint, like, echo is the wrong word, but they're very faintly hearing the voices of people who are talking to Darryl or around Darryl. And then, once they actually get to his consciousness, we have this odd landscape. At least there was gravity, though it felt lighter than Earth's. And he knew there was an atmosphere because Kit could hear sound from outside his force field, the hiss of wind. But he wasn't convinced that the atmosphere was breathable, especially because he could feel the cold outside even through the force field. The air on the far side of the force field was full of blue-white smoke or fog, moving fast, blown by the wind, and there was more blue-white stuff underfoot. And he says it's like being inside a light bulb, which I'm not entirely sure why that's what he says here. Like, I don't understand that comparison. That's part of why I was so confused here. Kit was able to look out of the light bulb and see that the two of them had stepped into a snowfield. Except that snow isn't blue, Kit thought. Ponch, though insulated from the cold, nonetheless shifted uncertainly from foot to foot in the robin's egg blue stuff. And he finally realizes that, oh, this isn't snow like made from frozen water. This is frozen methane. And that it has to be so incredibly cold here. I think eventually we get an actual measurement, and it's like something like negative 200 degrees Celsius, something like that. He knew if he tried to breathe at this temperature, it would freeze his lungs to solid blocks of blood and water ice. He popped his manual open to a pre-marked page for reading environmental conditions and let it take a moment to do its sensing while he turned in a circle looking at the landscape. So I felt similarly to this as I felt when in I'm trying to remember Deep Wizardry, when they go underwater so deep below the surface. And it's just this incredibly anxiety-inducing atmosphere of pressure and danger. And that was definitely how I felt here. It just gave me such anxiety. It really did. And I kept worrying about it. And they barely escape because things begin to sort of go haywire at the end of this scene. Let's see. Kit glanced at the manual again, read the words in the speech that began to spell themselves out there. The temperature outside was about 200 degrees below 0 centigrade. Yeah. We won't stay long, just long enough to talk to Darryl. The contrast between the room temperature range that the two of them needed to function and the temperature of the space around them was as extreme as the difference between room temperature and a blowtorch. And this meant that keeping his own environment and Ponch's tolerable would require Kit to spend a lot of energy in a hurry. He was going to have to keep a close eye on the energy levels of the force field. This was no kind of place to have it fail suddenly. The cold would kill them both in seconds if their protection failed. So at this point, Ponch asks him if he can do something to lower the wind. And he attempts it, and nothing happens. And he's trying to figure out why that is. Because his force field is working. So it's not like just doing magic has been outlawed in this territory. You know, he's able to keep the force field up, but for some reason he can't seem to do other things. And yet later on, he is able to like pull a piece of magic out. He doesn't wind up using it, but it's the like sort of laser focused heat. And he pulls it out in response to seeing a basilisk, and he doesn't wind up using it because the basilisk just completely passes him by. But I am a little bit interested in why that is. If there's like a difference in the types of magic that makes the difference. I don't know. So Ponch says, as for the lone one, it's distracted and Darryl's moving. Come on. Snow tonight, a voice said from somewhere immeasurably distant. You heard it that time, right? Kit said. I heard something, Ponch said, and then he paused in mid-step. I hear something besides that, too. Wings. The last time he'd heard a wind like this was when the hurricane had come through 3 years ago. The hurricane, though, had at least sounded impersonal in its rage. The sound of this wind had a more intimate quality, invasive, as if it was purposely pointed at Kit, and the voices were part of it. Won't be able to, and in local news tonight, wish I could understand why, but there's no point in even asking, I guess. Come on, love, we need to get this on you. No, don't do that. Remember what we talked about. The voices somehow both spoke at normal volume and screamed in Kit's ears. Intrusive, grating, maddening. He couldn't shut them out. He opened his manual and hurriedly went through it to the section that would allow him to soundproof the force field, for the voices were scaling up into the deafening range now, an ever-increasing roar. The noise wasn't just made up of voices, either. Music was part of it, too, but music gone horribly wrong, screeching at him, and also sounds that might have come from Kit's own house, a door closing, someone opening a drawer, sounds that were magnified past bearing, intolerable. Kit recited the wizardry, having to do it nearly at the top of his lungs to hear himself think. To his great relief, it took. He could tell all the sound around him outside the force field was still rising, but now at least it was muted to a tolerable level. "Wow," he said to Paunch, who was shaking his own head, also troubled by the noise. So, this is really this is obviously meant to convey to somebody who isn't sensitive to the ordinary volume levels of noises or voices, what it is like for someone who is sensitive to these sorts of things. And it sounds just so incredibly difficult. I really can't imagine. And there's all sorts of there's a whole spectrum of autism. So there are going to be people who are much more sensitive than others, even who are within the spectrum of people who are autistic. Some, it may not bother. I know that some friends of mine who have autistic children, they don't get bothered by noise in general, necessarily. They get bothered by certain types of noise, or they really enjoy certain types of noise or sensation. And so they will continually make a certain noise, or they'll play a game that has familiar sound effects, and they get a lot of comfort out of those sound effects, that kind of thing. He sees Darryl at this point, dressed in nothing but jeans and a t-shirt, running through the terrible cold and wind, headlong, a little sloped forward from the waist, as Kit had seen him running for the van at school. "Darryl!" Kit shouted. "Hey, Darryl, wait up!" Darryl turned his head for just a flash, looking toward Kit. For a fraction of a second, their eyes met. Darryl ran on. Kit reeled back as if someone had hit him across the face, and staggered with shock and pain. He had felt, for that second, what Darryl had felt, the unbearable pain of another person's regard. Kit had sometimes found it hard to look into someone else's eyes, but that was nothing like this. This pain denied even the existence of one who looked back. For Darryl, even meeting the gaze of his own eyes in the mirror was impossible, nonsensical, painful. Yet Kit also thought of the blind looks of the statues at the edge of the world of dunes, and suddenly realized that maybe it was only to him that their blindness seemed creepy. To Darryl and his autism, maybe they were as close as he could comfortably get to the experience of being looked at by another being. It's something he wants, even though it hurts. At least he wants it, though. If he didn't... And I'm very curious about where that sentence was going to go. At least he wants it. If he didn't... What does that mean? Was he going to say, if he didn't, that would be more difficult to work with? Would it be if he didn't, why is he even alive? I'm just really curious what it was he was thinking there, and what it was where Diane Duane was going to go with that line. So at this point, this is when they see the basilisks. And I don't remember if we've seen them in this story already, but I'm going to read this weird description. The thing wasn't big, maybe only 6 feet long or so, but it looked deadly. It was as if someone had taken the 3-finned symmetry of a standard paper plane and brought it to life, but with wings that were clawed on the forward edges. The creature was a furry blue-white, just paler than the snow, and eyeless, though it had a long, nasty, many-fanged mouth that ran down the length of its body between 2 of the wings. and it brought the terrible noise with it as it shot overhead and past, dragging behind it still more of the torrent of voices and sounds that threatened to drown whatever lay in their wake. It tilted one wing and started to circle Kit. I am going to Google basilisk right now and see if there is any sort of artwork out there imitating this that's sort of, because I am having a difficult time trying to picture what the hell she means when she's talking about comparing it to like a paper plane. There's a lot of different interpretations of basilisk, so none of these is particularly helpful. And none of it seems to line up with the description that she just gave. I'm genuinely like, we've got a chicken with like lizard legs. We've got some actual lizards, which I'm assuming that there's like a lizard in the world named a basilisk, and that's what this is. And then we've got, the basilisk from Harry Potter. Why? And there's one from Witcher, which looks a little bit more like a dragon. It's got arms and legs and everything. I don't know. So apparently there are 3 types of basilisk: hot, cold, and starry. A word? Says who? Like, this is one of the few times where I feel like Danny Dwayne tends to set things up pretty well. And this was one where I was like, did we know that? Is that like, she says it with the kind of casual mention that feels like I'm supposed to remember this from another book, which I definitely don't. But anyway, so yeah, this is when he takes out this other spell. And it's something that he was initially had created to light the grill in the summertime, which I love, this extremely practical spell. He hurriedly pulled one of them out, shook the long chain of characters out until it solidified into a rod, and twiddled its end to reset the air variable. Fortunately, it didn't take long. All he had to do was deduct the oxygen and add some hydrocarbons. Oh, if that's all. Like, I really... What? How? What? I would love to know if their understanding of chemistry has improved at school at all. Like, are they able to do amazingly in certain classes because of what they have had to learn for wizardry? Because that feels like, if you know to deduct oxygen and add some hydrocarbons to your spell, it really feels like you should be able to ace a 9th grade chemistry test. You know what I'm saying? I don't know, but we'll see. The basilisk didn't bother swooping at him, just went screaming on past. Several others followed, all heading in the direction Darryl had gone. Kit stood there for a moment and let out a long breath that was as much frustration as relief. It was annoying to have something to shoot with and something worth shooting at, and then not have an excuse to shoot at it. He stopped running, Paunch said suddenly. What? Kit said. They've caught him? I'm not sure, Paunch said. So, this is when there's like a couple of like I said, typos that actually interrupt the reading flow. Like, a lot of times a typo, you understand what was supposed to be there. But these typos, there are incorrect letters, and then there's also spaces. So this, I'm pretty sure, is just meant to say the stealth spell. But it says capital I space H-E stealth spell. And I'm pretty sure that that's just, a typo, that it was meant to be T-H-E, no spaces. But I kept rereading it being like, what the fuck, before I realized that it was even a typo at all. The stealth spell hasn't been working since we got here. Otherwise, Darryl wouldn't have seen me either. Kit wondered if these spaces where he kept finding Darryl weren't just rigorously constructed landscapes of the mind, obeying natural law, but genuine alternate universes, custom-made, the kind of places Nita had been working to help her mother, the kind of thing Paunch had started creating on his own, places where even the way wizardry works can be changed. And that, I think, is sort of what the conclusion that Nita eventually comes to. But we will get there because I definitely want to read that. I was very confused by it, so I feel like I'm going to put this out there. It doesn't look like there's anybody in the chat, but if anybody's listening and they feel like they have an explanation that will be more understandable, feel free. So they're jogging to catch up, and Kit's starting to feel a little bit of fatigue here. And Darryl was standing there with his arms up over his eyes, twisting, turning from side to side, and then he stopped. Between one breath and another, he had become encased in what looked like a solid block of ice. The basilisks were scrabbling at it with the claws on their wings, screaming, and the thunder up in the sightless, coldly burning sky beat in the air like a heart, deafening. Suddenly, the basilisks flapped away, up into that blue-white haze, as a shadow approached them out of the blowing snow. And this is the lone power, who is here and acting like he really has this all, like, tied up finally, and he has this black-bladed sword. So it comes to this. For a while, at least, you tried to fight. I'll give you credit for that. But now you've given up. What were you thinking of? That I'd be merciful now? That I'd let you off easy because of your problem? You should know better. When people give up around me, the poor fools pay the price. Not that not giving up helps them either, of course. Even those who pass their ordeals, there's no escape. I get them later. All they ever manage to do is delay the inevitable. In your case, though, there won't be any further delay. You should never have accepted the power if you weren't willing to use it. And you weren't, so now you lose it. So at this point, Kit's standing there and he's like not supposed to interfere because, again, this is this kid's ordeal and that's the rule. But Kit can't stand just watching. And it says Kit chose a quark-level dissociation tool, the wizardry equivalent of a low-yield tactical nuke, hooked his canned description of himself into it, told the wizardry to take as much of his power as it needed for one good shot, then swallowed hard once, because this was scary stuff. And he steps forward and tries to get the attention of the Lone One in order to make his attack. And the Lone One does not pay any attention. The Lone One was intent on Darryl. It lifted that black blade high. Darkness ran down it, sweeping after it in a trail as it brought the sword swinging around. Kit swallowed one more time and spoke the first of 3 words that would activate the dissociator, and the sword struck the middle of that block of methane ice and shattered. Kit stared. The lone power straightened up from the stroke and looked suddenly dumbfounded at the broken stump of a sword in its hand. The block of ice wasn't marred, not even scratched. If it was astonished, so was Kit. Could it be that the lone power can't see you when you're in someone else's ordeal? But Tom would have said something. Or is this space just the way it is because of Darryl being here? If Mama's right, if some autistic people have trouble with the concept that other people might be or think differently, then maybe nothing it does to Darryl here can hurt him, because the things it does aren't things he'd do. I didn't really understand that framing. Why wouldn't it be able to hurt him because it's doing things differently than Darryl would? Simply because Darryl's lack of understanding would be an inherent protection? I don't really understand that. I don't know. So the lone one at this point is not pleased and begins to sort of threaten him, but he can't do anything. He's just shit talking. And it's just like, do you really think I'm just going to walk away? And as we find out later from Nita, he definitely doesn't think the lone power is just going to walk away. That's the point, is that he knows the lone power is going to chase him. So at the very least, he can make it as difficult and rewarding as possible. Is this what your precious powers gave you your wizardry for? To stand here inactive as a statue, refusing the inevitable? Well, it won't help you, coward. You can't come out the other side of this until you confront me. And you won't confront me. You'll just stay in there like the pitiful reject that you are, while outside, in reality, your darling mother and father grieve over you every day. You're not being very considerate of them, are you? After everything they've gone through, now you have a chance to stand up, to conquer me, to come out the other side of your power, and you won't take it. And so, yeah, he's trying to goad this kid. And it's not working. I'm sure that this isn't the first time this sort of line of attack has been used. And the lone one just starts yelling, come out, come out, come out, and let's finish it. And, of course, Darryl does not move. It doesn't matter, the lone one said. I can wait. I have all the time in the worlds. Sooner or later, you'll drop this ploy and try another that's less effective. Sooner or later, in life or after, you'll be forced to face me, and when you finally do, you'll wish your soul had never been created. For that day, I'll wait as long as it takes. So, at this point, he takes off, and Kit knows for sure, because of the feeling of the air, that the lone power is gone. And Ponch says, let's get him out of here. And I was sort of like, how? Like, he's in his own head. I don't think it works like that. And it doesn't seem to, but they're just trying to operate, I think, on the simplest assumption of how things work, because otherwise they wouldn't do anything. The closer Kit got to the block of ice, the stranger things started to seem. That weariness that Kit had been feeling to a certain extent since he got here now got stronger with every step closer to Darryl. He rubbed his eyes, staggered over to the block, put a hand on it. It was frozen methane, but the force field protected him from its touch. Darryl, I can't believe you held it off like that. Nice going. But Darryl didn't so much as twitch an eyelid. As Kit bent over the block, trying to figure out how to get rid of it, or at least how to rouse Darryl, he found himself having more and more trouble believing in any of this. It started to seem as if none of it was real. Not the cold, not the wind, not the single small, still, cold shape standing there rigid in the ice, expressionless, unmoving, unsinging. And as for the concept of the lone power banging on the block of ice, not only frustrated but powerless, that couldn't have happened either. The feeling began to grow in Kit that this wasn't really Darryl, that he wasn't here, which was something Ponch had said the last time. Now, though, Kit could feel for himself what Ponch had meant. Darryl's presence here was illusory. None of this was real. And that's something that I guess because Kit's like half asleep later when he's talking to Nita, it explains why he didn't think of this. But she says something about having been with Darryl, and he says that's impossible. I was with him at that time. And I was like, don't you remember the fact that it doesn't seem like it's actually Darryl? Like, there's something else going on. And he doesn't, like I said, she calls him up out of his sleep. So that's probably why. But I definitely was a little bit like, come on, man, you know, there's some sort of weird splitting or illusion happening. So this is when Ponch begins to panic and is like, we really have to go. And Kit's sort of like, go where? What do you mean? And Ponch tackles him, and they wind up falling through an opening into actual real snow, not frozen methane snow. And I was sort of wondering, too, if the feeling that none of this is real was part of the attempt to forget that Darryl occasionally has, which we'll get to that. But this is when he realizes that it's like, I think 2:30 in the morning. Oh, God, the time flow there wasn't what I was expecting. I'm going to get it now. I'm completely wrecked and they're going to kill me. So that's where that chapter ends. And then we start elucidations, which is pretty much entirely with Nita. And she winds up, she's been studying and she winds up falling asleep at her desk, but doesn't realize it. So she wakes up in the dream because of the lucid dream charm that she made. and doesn't even understand what's happening for a second before she's like, oh, I must have fallen asleep. That's wild. And this is a similar thing where it's a lot of darkness and then like a single pool of light. So she starts walking towards that light as she did before. And it says, Nita became aware of a low mutter of sound out in the further reaches of the darkness. It took some minutes of walking through the dark before she recognized it as human voices speaking, a slow, muted sound of conversation coming from somewhere else, but not seeming to matter particularly. It was as if Nita was hearing these voices through someone else, filtered, and the filter made it all seem not so much unimportant, but simply unreal, unrelated to anything that mattered, as if a TV show about some subject that bored you was blathering away in the background while you were too busy with other things to turn it off. She shivered a little, recognizing the kinship of this filter with the one she'd been seeing life through lately. Can something like this get stuck in place? Nita wondered. It wasn't an idea she much liked. And suddenly it made that don't care, don't feel like it attitude seem not so much like a self-indulgence as a danger. What kind of wizard doesn't care, she thought. What kind of wizard... And she gets sort of cut off here, but I found this really fascinating. So this is one of those things that I really wonder if the people reading this book, if it's children, understand how subtle the theming is here, because the title of this book is A Wizard Alone. And I was sort of wondering, as we got into it, do they mean Darryl? There was a sense of Nita and Kit not working together. So I was like, is that what it means? Is that they're each like doing their own separate missions? And then I got here and I was like, oh, and it pretty much gets clarified as this chapter goes on that it's kind like that title refers to both of them and feelings of being alone and purposely isolating yourself, because I feel like there's a real, like, the tendency in storytelling is to talk about characters who either like are alone and don't want to be, feel like actively lonely and are seeking out friendships that don't work out, or seeking out a romance that doesn't work out, or it's about the like sort of lone wolf character where they're a real loner, but that's like an advantage and it makes them more independent. But this sort of being alone is not something that gets explored often because I think it's a difficult thing to capture on screen. It's so internal, you know, and this is an effort to hold people at arm's length because you aren't interested in engaging because it hurts too much. And it hurts too much for very different reasons for the two of them. You know, he has this, like, what would you call autism? I don't want to use the word illness because that feels like it's just needs a cure. And I know that that is like a pet peeve of people in that community for it to be referred to like that. But if you're dealing with autism, that keeping people at arm's length is like, that's a survival mechanism because you are dealing with overstimulation sometimes. And her reasons for wanting to keep people at arm's length are because she just experienced this incredible grief and everything feels too sharp. And this is something that I deeply relate to. You know, anybody who has gone through loss knows what this is like, where every single daily task reminds you of the person that you lost. Every single place you go, every food you eat, every song you hear has something attached to it that hurts. And it can feel like you just need to hide. But for the most part, we aren't in a position where we're able to do that. Most people have to continue going to work, have to continue showing up for someone. And so you have to put on this like big layer between you and the outer world. in order to fucking survive. And I love this moment that the attitude seemed not so much like a self-indulgence as a danger. I really love the use of the word self-indulgence. She could have phrased that a lot of ways. And self-indulgence is the kind of word that I think can be misinterpreted because when we hear the words, they tend to be used in the sense of like, that movie was so self-indulgent. Like, it's usually meant to be sort of a criticism, you know, you are accusing something of being self-indulgent. But when you really look at the words, self-indulgent it's not inherently negative. It just means that you are allowing something for yourself. And it's something that is voluntary and may be allowing things to be easier for you in a way that we're not saying if it's good or bad, but it's convenient, you know? And so I sort of liked the nuance to that word and it being recontextualized as potentially a danger. That just really felt to me like the idea of being so disconnected from everything. When you step back and look at how things have been for you, most people will admit like, no, I don't want to be like this forever, but it feels like there's no way out, you know? And like I said, I'm just very curious about children reading this and if they understand how incredibly nuanced that is, the way that she and Darryl are experiencing a similar desire to sort of check out from the world and how different their motivations for that are, but that being their common ground, and that's why they're able to sort of encounter each other in this weird dimension. I think that's really wild. And just Diane Duane is just this kind of writer that she keeps sneaking up on me. I keep getting caught up in the plotting and the magical systems and forgetting that what she's writing about is extremely emotional stuff and really like devastating often. I feel like the previous book to this one was probably the least, or not the previous one, because that was the one where Nita's mother is getting sick. So yeah, no. I was talking about the one set in Ireland. Probably has like the least emotional baggage to it, I think. But I really, for the most part, it just catches me off guard every time. She's just doing something that feels like, yeah, it's a bunch of kids who are wizards. And then she whips out this like life experience, life lesson. And I have to imagine that if you read these as a kid and you come back to them as an adult, your mind is just blown because you're realizing the significance of all of this that you didn't understand the first time around. So she tries to talk to this clown that's sitting there from her other dream, the first one I think of the book. And eventually we begin to realize that the clown is like Darryl's. He's sort of pulling a memory out of her head and presenting her with something familiar in order to communicate. So this isn't his choice necessarily. It's like, you know, she commands him to speak to her. And it says, it was astonishing how just uttering the phrase made a kind of shocked silence after it. The manual had said there was no resisting such an injunction. Nonetheless, there followed one of the longest silences Nita could remember hearing. It took a long time before the clown looked up. Its eyes didn't come to rest exactly on Nita, but looked a little way over her shoulder, and the voice that replied, not from the clown itself, but from the darkness all around, was absolutely flat. "I am one," it said. Chills ran up and down Nita's back at the sound of a phrase unnervingly close to the one reputed to have caused the Big Bang, and much else. I doubt that very much," Nita said. "At least not the way I understand a term." "Then you are one." Nita's expression was rueful. Not by a long shot. I'm just one more mortal, and a wizard. The clown didn't look right at her, but Nita felt a change coming over the darkness around the clown. Instead of being frightening, now the shadows outside the light were filled with potential and promise, and the light now seemed painful and arid, an expression of everything stuck and hopeless, a scorched, bright loneliness that didn't even have a word for itself. The clown looked at her helplessly, and though it seemed frozen in place, except for the rocking, the painted tear was real. All the darkness shivered with its pain. And it asks, what's a mortal? And she says the world goes on, but we don't. The painted mouth went wide, and a great cry of anguish burst out of the clown. Nita took a breath, terrified that she screwed up despite her caution. The second watched the first clown scream. I heard about the impermanence thing, said the second clown. The silence told me. What went wrong? Nita was finding all of this unusually weird, even for a dream. Yeah, all I could think as I was reading this, you guys, was about Twin Peaks. The thing with the clown and her just having like a conversation in the dark, this really felt very Lynchian to me. Granted, this winds up making a lot more sense, but nevertheless, the imagery and the whole like creepy vibe I got from it, that really was Lynchian for me. So let's see. She says something about how like eventually someone invented death. I know, the second clown said. Its voice was fighting with that robotic quality, the life in it struggling to get out. Just for a moment, it succeeded. Nita got a quick flicker rush of images and sounds. Dawns and sunsets, objects shaped roughly like the clown, all rushing hither and yon on unfathomable errands, shouting at one another about incomprehensible things. All kinds of pain were tangled up with the rush and roar, but strangest of all, it was pain that the one who experienced it actually welcomed. For the clown, that pain was a lifeline, something it clung to as a way to temporarily mask out sensations it couldn't bear, and as something that could sometimes pierce through the muffling blanket of non-feeling that kept draping itself over the clown's body and mind. Nita could feel that the clown hoped there might be more to life than hurting, but it was also willing to suffer the hurt if that meant staying alive to get its own job done. And that is such a lot. The idea of like, I really hope there's more than this, but I'll deal if this is all there is. I feel like a lot of us feel that fucking feeling every single day. You know, that's like a universal. So at this point, there's a little ongoing conversation, and she says that there is more than one of us to the clown, and then both of them start screaming. And for a moment, she's like terrified and just freaks out a little bit. And then all of a sudden, there's a feeling to the scream that reminds her of when Darryl was born, and how it says, after she'd first become aware that Nita might possibly be in competition with her for their parents' attention. Darreen's lung power at the age of 2 had initially caused Nita some innocent wonder, but this was a phase that had lasted about 5 minutes, and now, as the scream just kept on going, Nita let out a long breath and then invoked the remedy she'd learned way back then. "All right," she shouted in the speech, "shut up!" The second clown fell silent in complete amazement. "There is more than one of us. I'm sorry if this poses some kind of problem for you, but screaming's not going to make all the rest of us go away." And at this point, the clown sort of pauses and says, "Oh, so that didn't work." And ignoring you didn't work either. Let's see, where does it go? Ignoring you didn't work either. Nita found herself remembering how desperately she'd wanted to ignore the preparations for her mother's funeral, to the point where she had actually partly succeeded, and the funeral itself had begun to seem unreal, like a bad dream. It was after that that the remoteness began to sink into her. The feeling of nothing mattering, of not wanting to deal with anything, she thought. The filter I've been stuck with. That's what this guy and I have in common. That's what's been drawing us together, even when he's tried to break the link himself. But somehow it seems important for it not to get broken now. Why ignore everybody? Because you're distractions. Distraction from what? The clown looked around at the darkness. This. And you don't have to stay here. And suddenly, there were 2 clowns again. One of them was back in the middle of the spotlight. Nita made a silent bet with herself as to which one would shred next. I forgot to mention that happened. The spotlit clown says, "But this is all there is." The one standing in the shadows said, "If I go there, that's waiting." So I'm assuming that these are like the aspects of himself that he can create. And this, I'm running out of time, so I have to like rush through this part of the conversation. But eventually Darryl shows himself as who he is. And she realizes like, oh my God, that's who I've been talking to this whole time. I was thinking it might even be an alien, you know? And he sort of presents like, I don't know that you're not part of the lone ones deal. Like, I'm being cautious with you because I'm not sure what you even are. And then comes this moment. It's after everybody else one way or another. Eventually it gets us all. But if we pay attention to what we're doing, we can make a whole lot of trouble for it along the way. The kit looked up at Nita with a startling suddenness, and she caught the force of his glance full on as he grinned back. "I know," he said. Nita actually had to stagger back a step to keep her balance, mentally and physically. Meeting his gaze was like being hit over the head with a brick, but a good brick, an abrupt, concentrated, overwhelming onslaught of cheerful power with a slight edge of mischief in it. Nita had hardly ever felt so intense a wash of emotion or attitude from any being, human or otherwise. "I know," he said again. "I'm doing just that. I do it all the time now, and it's a whole lot of fun." I always have to make sure I stop having the fun before it notices. Every time I find out again that I'm not alone, I let the knowledge go. Why? Because it's what always happened when things got bad for me. When it first turned up in my life, the way it turns up at the bottom of everything bad. I was fine. I always knew who I was. Until the world started screaming at me, making it impossible to think, to be with people, to be. I would forget myself again and again. I couldn't keep myself. I would forget everything that hurt and everything that didn't. But then that started to change. I started to remember again for a while, and it was still in here with me. Then I saw how to repay the little favor it did me. It can't stop coming back to deal with me, and I never let it close the deal. The only problem is that I keep getting better, sliding back toward the way things used to be when I was normal. And I'm a little bit like, okay, worried about this, but, what can you do? And every time, to keep it interested, I have to let go of a world that has other people in it. So I'm going to jump ahead. At this point, she remembers the whole thing about the clown saying, "I can't get off." And, the feeling of, I think that night that she encountered that was like, I'm fighting a fight that can't be won, but I'm fucking fighting it, is also him. And she wakes up and she goes to her book and she tries to leave a message for Kit, And eventually, like I said, she tells him that she thinks she was with Darryl and he doesn't think so. So she's going through her book and she finds this thing. I'm going to read this entry. Trying to find it. Here it is. Abdals/pillars. This category of created being is independent of wizard status, but still included because of the sharing of various functions and qualities across species and eschatological barriers. I'm not sure if I read that right. The sobriquet pillars refers to the immense supportive strength inherent in these creatures wherever they appear. The physical and spiritual structure of the universe and its contents is strengthened against the assaults of evil by the pillars' presence and weakened by their loss. While they occasionally may also be wizards, Abdals display no unusual aptitude for the art. Their value lies elsewhere. Their status comes from direct endowment by the One. Their power is derived strictly from the incorrupt nature of their personality. Some have unusual abilities of perception, reaching into other universes, while seeing the entire physical world as a mirage. Some have sufficient control over their physical natures to change their body's will without recourse to normal wizardry or travel distances, or to appear in two places at the same time. The pillars are rarely recognized as such by their contemporaries. Should they become conscious of their own status as Abdals, the realization itself renders them ineffective in their role, which is to channel the One's power without obstruction into strengthening of the world. Their portion of that power is then lost to the world, and with its loss, the Abdal dies. So, I'm out of time, which is a shame. I have to withhold my judgment on this, but there's a thing happening here that I'm a little worried about, which is the sort of thing that neurotypicals will do. Well, not even just neurotypicals. People who are fully able-bodied as well. We want to turn a disability into a sort of superpower because it makes us feel like control over the world, to be able to explain away something that we find uncomfortable to imagine living with. And I'm concerned about the parallel that's apparently happening between him being normal again and that being apparently when he's growing conscious of his own role, and when we are in danger of him no longer having this ability to fight the One at all. So if that's true, that means that the display of autism that we are seeing and understanding from the outside is a symptom of him fighting evil. And that's just a little bit too much magical handicap for me. I am not sure how I feel about this, and I'm not sure that I'm even right about this. So I just wanted to put it out there. And, this is she comes to this conclusion, and that's sort of the end of the chapter. But yeah, I'm just sort of leery about where we're going to wind up. So I guess we'll see. But yeah, thank you very much again to Tristen for commissioning this episode. There's only one more commissioned for Friday the 28th so far, I think. But I'm not sure how many, how much there is remaining of this book. Let me see. Page 205 of 335. Oh yeah, there's 2 more episodes left at least. So if there's one more person out there who wants to commission another episode, I would appreciate it. There's also the possibility that you did, and it just hasn't been entered yet. So keep an eye out. And yeah, I'm just I have no idea where we're going with this now. And what a wild idea to introduce to the lore. So I guess we'll see. All right, guys, until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
Unspoiled Network podcast.